Get out, before I make you regret it. Helen Carter's voice cracks like a whip as Makya bursts into the dark room, her heart pounding at the sight of her sister Wapun, trembling and bloodied, her head shaved. Makya's hands shake with rage as she shoves Helen aside, only to freeze when a gunshot echoes and a stone crashes onto Wapun's leg, her scream piercing the air. Makya, a 19-year-old Blackfeet girl, lives in a poor reservation in Montana in 1935, alongside her father Enapay and her 10-year-old sister Wapun. Each day, she steps into the boarding school where she works, met with cold stares and whispered slurs from white teachers. There, native children are forced to abandon their language and culture, beaten if they dare speak Blackfeet. Makya is torn between preserving her people's identity and the fear of punishment for defying the system. She swallows her pain, working quietly to provide for Wapun and her father, who still carries the grief of her mother's death. Every night, as Wapun sings old Blackfeet songs, Makya holds her sister's hand tightly, silently vowing to protect her from the cruel world outside. But deep down, she knows her silence is slowly eroding her soul. Makya's boots kicked up dust as she sprinted down the dirt path, her breath sharp with worry. Wapun was never late, not once, and the sun was already dipping low. The boarding school loomed ahead, its cracked walls gray under the fading light. She skidded to a stop at the entrance, her heart lurching as a faint sob drifted from a locked room down the hall. Pressing her ear to the cold wooden door, she froze. Wapun's voice, choked with pain, begged for help. Makya's fists pounded the door, her shouts echoing. "Open it! Now!" A teacher's head poked out from another room, frowning, but Makya didn't care. The lock clicked, and the door swung open. Helen Carter stood there, her face twisted, a stick raised over Wapun, who cowered on the floor, her scalp bleeding, hair shorn to stubble. Makya's vision blurred with rage. She lunged, shoving Helen hard enough to send her stumbling against the wall. Wapun's trembling arms clung to Makya's waist, her sobs muffled against her sister's shirt. Blood trickled down Wapun's face, warm and sticky, as she whispered, "I didn't mean to." Makya's chest tightened, her hands shaking as she stroked Wapun's back, vowing to keep her safe. But as she held her sister, the weight of Helen's sneer and the school's unyielding cruelty pressed down. She wanted to scream, to fight, but the helplessness gnawed at her. How could she protect Wapun from a place that broke children like twigs? Footsteps thundered down the hall, and Hirtrum Grayson's shadow filled the doorway. His voice boomed, sharp as a blade. "Makya, you've gone too far this time." Makya's jaw clenched, but she kept Wapun shielded behind her, ignoring the sting of Helen's glare. Then Frank Larson, the town's burly cop, pushed through, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip, his lips curled in a sneer. "Trouble again, huh?" he muttered, eyes raking over Makya like she was dirt. Grayson's finger jabbed toward her. "Hold her, Frank." Before Makya could react, Frank's meaty hand slammed her against the wall, the rough plaster scraping her back. She struggled, but his grip tightened. "Stay still," he growled. To prove his point, Frank yanked his gun free and fired a shot at the ceiling. The crack exploded in Makya's ears, and Wapun shrieked. A chunk of stone broke loose from the wall, tumbling down with a sickening thud onto Wapun's leg. Her scream tore through Makya's heart as she fought Frank's hold, desperate to reach her sister. "Wapun!" she cried. But Frank's arm pinned her. Grayson loomed closer, his voice cold. "Keep your mouth shut, or I'll have you locked up and Wapun sent to a reformatory." Makya's knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, her eyes locked on Wapun's crumpled form. "Please," she whispered, tears burning. "Don't take her." Grayson's lips twitched. "Then stay quiet." Makya's hands balled into fists, her vow to protect Wapun now tangled in fear and powerlessness. Makya cradled Wapun in her arms, each step home heavy with dread. Wapun's shallow breaths rasped against her chest, her small body limp, skin fever-hot. The reservation's dirt road stretched endlessly under the darkening sky, and Makya's arms ached, but she didn't stop. Inside their small wooden house, Enapay leapt from his chair as the door creaked open. "Wapun!" His voice broke, eyes wide with panic, as he saw her bloodied face and swollen leg. Makya laid Wapun on a blanket, her hands trembling as she tucked a cloth under her sister's head. "What happened?" Enapay demanded, kneeling beside them. Makya's voice quivered as she recounted Helen's cruelty, Grayson's threats, and Frank's gunshot that shattered Wapun's leg. Her words faltered, choked by sobs, but anger burned through. "They can't do this," she said, fists clenched. Enapay's face hardened, but he shook his head. "Stay quiet, Makya. They'll destroy us." She stared at him, disbelief mingling with defiance. "I won't let them hurt her again." Ignoring his protests, Makya grabbed a stubby pencil and paper, her resolve steeling. By lamplight, she poured out every detail of Wapun's suffering, her handwriting jagged with emotion. Hours passed, her eyes stinging, but she finished the letter to the education inspector. As she sealed it, Enapay's voice softened. "I was beaten at that school too, for speaking our tongue." Makya froze, her heart sinking at his pain, but it fueled her. She slipped the letter into her pocket, hope flickering. Maybe the inspector would listen. Makya's arms burned as she carried Wapun through the town's dusty streets, her sister's whimpers cutting deeper with each step. The hospital's white walls gleamed under the morning sun, a stark contrast to the reservation's weathered shacks. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic, and Makya's voice trembled as she approached the desk. "Please, my sister's leg. It's broken. She needs help." The head doctor, a tall man with thinning hair, glanced up, his eyes narrowing at their worn clothes and dark skin. "We're full," he snapped, turning away. Makya's heart sank, but she stepped closer, her voice cracking. "She's dying, please." His sneer deepened, and two guards grabbed her arms, shoving her toward the exit. Wapun's weight dragged as Makya stumbled onto the street, her pleas swallowed by the slamming door. Tears stung her eyes, but a soft voice called from the alley. A young nurse, her face kind but nervous, beckoned them over. In the shadow of the hospital, she knelt beside Wapun, wrapping her swollen leg with clean bandages. "It's bad," the nurse whispered, her hands steady. "She could lose the leg if it's not treated soon." Makya's throat tightened, but she clasped the nurse's hand, gratitude mixing with fear. As the nurse stood to leave, she hesitated, her voice low. "I've seen native kids taken from the school, gone without a trace." Makya's blood ran cold, her mind racing. The boarding school wasn't just cruel, it hid something darker. She hugged Wapun tighter, resolve hardening. She'd find out what. Makya sat by Wapun's side, pressing a damp cloth to her sister's fevered forehead. The small room smelled of sweat and herbs, the only medicine they could afford. Wapun's face twisted in pain, her leg swollen under the nurse's bandages. Makya's fingers brushed Wapun's cheek, whispering old Blackfeet lullabies to soothe her, but her own heart pounded with worry. Each morning, she trudged to the reservation's rusty mailbox, her breath catching as she sifted through empty air. No reply from the inspector. Enapay watched from the doorway, his eyes heavy. "You're poking a bear, Makya," he said, his voice soft but firm. She nodded, but her resolve didn't waver. At the edge of the reservation she met Aiyana, her friend's braids swaying as they sat on a fallen log. Makya spilled everything, the letter, Wapun's pain, her hopes pinned on the inspector. Aiyana's face darkened. "I've seen kids whipped at that school for less than speaking Blackfeet," she said, her voice low. They talked late into the afternoon, weighing the chance of justice against the school's iron grip. Aiyana's eyes widened suddenly, her whisper urgent. "I heard Grayson talking. He knows about your letter." Makya's stomach dropped, her hands clenching the log's rough bark. Had she endangered them all? But as she looked back toward home, where Wapun lay suffering, a spark of hope held firm. The inspector might still listen, might bring justice. She stood, brushing dirt from her skirt, determined to keep fighting. Dust swirled around Makya's feet as she lingered near the boarding school, her eyes locked on a man in a crisp suit stepping from a black car. His briefcase and stiff posture screamed authority, the education inspector she'd been waiting for. Her heart leapt, hope surging as she slipped behind a tree, watching him stride into the school. She crept closer, her boots silent on the grass, peering through a cracked window. Inside, Grayson greeted the inspector with a wide smile, their laughter spilling out like old friends sharing a joke. Makya's fingers dug into the windowsill, her hope wavering. She edged toward the door, straining to catch their words, but a sharp voice cut through. "What are you doing here?" Helen Carter loomed, her eyes narrow. Makya stammered, backing away as Helen shooed her off like a stray dog. At the reservation's edge, Makya found Aiyana, her words tumbling out about the inspector's visit. "He's here, Aiyana. He'll find out what they did to Wapun." Aiyana nodded, her face brightening. "Maybe he'll shut the school down." They sat, imagining justice, until Makya returned to watch the inspector again. He strolled through the school, scribbling notes, but never spoke to the children, their bruised faces silent under his gaze. Then, without a word, he climbed into his car and drove away. Makya's chest tightened, her hope crumbling. He hadn't asked about Wapun, hadn't cared. As the car's dust faded, anger flared in her gut. The system wasn't fair, but she wouldn't stop. Wapun deserved better. Makya's heart pounded as she crouched behind a stack of crates near the boarding school, her eyes fixed on Grayson's broad back. The inspector's car had just vanished, leaving a trail of dust, and Grayson slipped into a shadowed alley. Makya crept after him, her boots barely touching the gravel. In the dim light, she saw Grayson hand a thick envelope to the inspector, their voices low, conspiratorial. The inspector tucked it into his coat with a nod, then walked away. Makya's breath caught, her hope shattering like glass. They'd bought him off. She stumbled back to the reservation, her chest tight with betrayal. Inside their cramped house, Enapay looked up from mending a net, his brow furrowing as Makya's voice broke, recounting the bribe. "I trusted them, Father," she whispered, tears spilling. Enapay's hand rested on her shoulder, heavy and warm. "The system's rotten, but you're stronger than it. Find another way." His words sparked a flicker of resolve. Makya wiped her face, her jaw set. She'd expose Grayson herself. At the reservation's edge, Aiyana listened, her eyes fierce. "Let's break into his office," she said, her voice steady. Makya nodded, fear mixing with determination. But the next morning, a letter arrived, the inspector's seal stark against the paper. It dismissed her complaint as unfounded. Makya's hand shook, the words blurring through her tears. They'd silenced her, but not for long. She clutched Aiyana's hand, her voice firm. "We'll make them pay." Despair clawed at her, but she wouldn't let it win. The tall grass swayed around Makya and Aiyana as they sat in a secluded field, the reservation's edge cloaked in twilight. Makya's fingers twisted a blade of grass, her stomach churning as Aiyana leaned close, her voice a fierce whisper. "We sneak into Grayson's office tonight. Find proof." Makya's eyes darted to the horizon, picturing Frank's gun, Grayson's threats. "If they catch us," she started, but Aiyana's hand gripped hers. "For Wapun," she said. Makya swallowed hard, Wapun's pale face flashing in her mind, and nodded. They rummaged through Aiyana's bag, pulling out a hairpin and a small knife to pick the lock. Back home, Makya sat by the flickering oil lamp, her pencil scratching across a tattered notebook. She wrote every detail: Helen's stick, Frank's shot, the inspector's betrayal, her words a vow to hold them accountable. Enapay's shadow fell across the page as he stood in the doorway, his voice low. "This is dangerous, Makya. They won't forgive." She met his gaze, her heart heavy but unyielding. "I can't let Wapun suffer for nothing." He sighed, his eyes soft with worry, and turned away. Alone, Makya clutched the notebook, her resolve hardening. "I'll find the truth no matter what," she whispered, her voice trembling with defiance. She tucked the hairpin into her pocket, her pulse racing. As she met Aiyana under the stars, their eyes locked in silent agreement. Fear gnawed at her, but the thought of Wapun's pain pushed her forward. They were ready. A sharp knock jolted Makya awake, the darkness of their small house broken only by the moon's faint glow. She crept to the door, her heart thudding, as Frank's silhouette filled the frame. His revolver glinted at his hip, his voice a low growl. "Stop stirring trouble, girl, or your family pays." Makya's mouth went dry, but she forced a nod, her voice steady. "I understand." Frank's eyes narrowed, searching her face. Then he turned and vanished into the night. She shut the door, her hand shaking, but her resolve burned brighter. Kneeling by the floorboards, she pried one loose and hid her notebook, the pages heavy with her plans to break into Grayson's office. Enapay's footsteps creaked behind her, his face pale. "I saw Frank watching the house today," he said, his voice tight. "He's not done with us." Makya's chest tightened, but she touched his arm, her voice soft. "I'll keep Wapun safe, Father. I promise." He looked away, his silence heavy with fear. As dawn broke, Makya stepped outside to fetch water, only to freeze. A crumpled note lay on the doorstep, Frank's scrawl stark. "Last warning." Her pulse raced, fear coiling in her gut. She crushed the note in her fist, her mind flashing to Wapun's bruised face, her sister's fragile hope. No threat would stop her. She tucked the note away, her jaw set, and headed to meet Aiyana. Fear clung to her, but her determination roared louder. She'd expose the school's secrets, no matter the cost. Makya's fingers trembled as she unfolded the letter, the inspector's seal glaring under the dim lamplight. Her eyes scanned the words, each one a dagger. "Your complaint lacks evidence. Unfounded." Her breath hitched, and she read aloud to Enapay, her voice cracking with betrayal. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in as she sank onto a chair, the paper crumpling in her fist. Enapay knelt beside her, his rough hand gentle on her arm. "They're cruel, but you're not done, Makya. Find another path for Wapun." His words stirred a faint spark in her chest. She trudged to meet Aiyana at the reservation's edge, the letter's weight heavy in her pocket. "They lied, Aiyana," she said, her voice hollow. "The system's a sham." Aiyana's eyes blazed, her hand gripping Makya's. "Then we fight harder. Remember Nita? She vanished from that school." The name stung, fueling Makya's resolve. She straightened, her jaw tight. "We'll find proof ourselves." But the next day at the boarding school, Grayson's voice boomed across the yard as she swept the steps. "Keep pushing, Makya, and you'll regret it." His glare pinned her, his threat chilling her bones. The other workers turned away, but Makya's hands tightened on the broom. The inspector's dismissal had crushed her hope, but Wapun's pain burned brighter. She wouldn't stop. As she walked home, her mind raced, plotting her next move. Evidence, real evidence, to tear Grayson's lies apart. Moonlight spilled through the boarding school's windows as Makya and Aiyana crept along its shadowed walls, their breaths shallow. The night was silent, save for the creak of their steps. At Grayson's office door, Makya's hands shook as she worked the hairpin into the lock, the metal scraping until it clicked. Inside, the air smelled of ink and dust. Makya rifled through Grayson's desk, her fingers brushing papers until she found a worn notebook, its pages listing names marked missing. Her heart raced, each name a ghost of a child stolen. Aiyana, posted at the door, hissed suddenly. "Someone's coming!" Heavy boots echoed down the hall. Makya stuffed the notebook inside her shirt, diving under the desk as Frank's silhouette filled the doorway. His lantern swung, casting jagged shadows. "Who's there?" he growled, his steps slow, deliberate. Makya held her breath, her body pressed against the desk's cold wood, the notebook sharp against her ribs. Frank's boots paused inches away, then turned back. The door thudded shut, and silence returned. Makya crawled out, her pulse thundering. Aiyana's wide eyes met hers, and they slipped out the window, sprinting into the night. Back home, Makya clutched the notebook, its weight both a treasure and a burden. She'd escaped, but the names haunted her. Each one was a story like Wapun's, and she'd uncover the truth, no matter how dangerous. Her fingers traced the pages, resolve stealing her heart. Makya sat by the flickering lamp, the stolen notebook open before her. Her eyes snagged on a name. Nita, a Blackfeet girl who'd vanished 2 years ago, her laughter once a fixture at community gatherings. Makya's throat tightened as she whispered the name to Enapay, who sat across from her, his face paling. "Nita, she played with you as kids," he said, his voice thick with shock. He leaned forward, his hands gripping the table. "Makya, this is bigger than us. Be careful, or they'll come for you." She nodded, but her fingers tightened on the notebook. She pried up a floorboard, hiding the book beneath it, the wood creaking as she sealed her secret. Determined to understand the scope of the school's crimes, she sought out Hassoun, the Blackfeet elder, at his small cabin. His weathered face creased with sorrow as she spoke of Nita and the notebook. "Too many children gone," he said, his voice heavy. "Year after year they disappear, and the school calls it running away." His eyes met hers, sharp with suspicion. "I've long thought they're selling our kids, Makya, trading them like cattle." The words hit like a blow, her mind reeling at the horror. Human trafficking under the school's roof. She stood, her fists clenched, fear and fury warring within. Hassoun's warning echoed, but Nita's name, Wapun's pain, drove her forward. She'd dig deeper, expose the school's rot, no matter what it took. Her resolve burned, unyielding. Makya hunched over the stolen notebook in a clearing, the morning mist curling around her and Aiyana. Pages rustled as they traced the list of missing children, each name a wound. Aiyana's voice was firm. "We need more, Makya. Grayson's office has answers." Makya's stomach knotted, Frank's shadow looming in her mind, his patrols tighter since their last break-in. She nodded, pulling a scrap of paper from her pocket to copy the names, her pencil scratching a promise to expose the truth. Back home, Enapay caught her slipping the list into her sleeve, his eyes sharp with worry. "You're playing with fire," he said, his voice low. "They'll burn us all." Makya's throat tightened, but she touched his hand. "I'll keep us safe, Father, but I can't stop." His silence weighed heavy as she turned away. At the school, a young student, her eyes wide with fear, tugged Makya's arm during a break. "I saw them take a girl last week, at midnight, in a truck," she whispered. Makya's heart lurched, the notebook's name suddenly real, urgent. The girl's words echoed, a call to act. She met Aiyana's gaze that evening, her voice steady despite the fear clawing her chest. "We go back tonight." The risk was higher, Frank's threats closer, but the image of Wapun's broken leg, the missing children, drove her. She tucked the hairpin into her pocket, her resolve a burning ember. They'd find the proof, no matter the danger. Stars blinked above as Makya and Aiyana slipped through the boarding school's back gate, the night air sharp with cold. Their breaths puffed white as they reached Grayson's office, the lock yielding to Makya's hairpin with a soft click. Inside, Makya's hands rifled through drawers, her pulse racing until she found a ledger, its pages detailing payments to a company in Washington. Her eyes widened, the sum staggering, far too large for school supplies. Aiyana, crouched by the door, scribbled copies of the entries, her pencil flying. "This is it," Makya whispered, her voice trembling with discovery. A sudden creak outside froze them. A guard's boots shuffled past, his lantern casting flickering shadows through the window. Makya grabbed Aiyana, pulling her into a cramped cabinet, their bodies pressed tight, hearts pounding. The guard's steps faded, and they exhaled, slipping out. As Makya scanned the ledger one last time, a name caught her eye. Jameson Cole, scrawled beside a massive payment. Her mind raced, the name unfamiliar, but heavy with menace. They fled, the ledger tucked inside Makya's shirt, its weight a dangerous prize. Back at the reservation, she hid it in a wooden box under her bed, her fingers lingering on the pages. Cole's name gnawed at her, a thread to a larger web. She'd escaped detection, but the stakes felt higher now. Wapun's fevered face flashed in her mind, urging her forward. She'd unravel this, no matter who Cole was. Makya slid the ledger into an old wooden box, her hands steady despite the fear twisting her gut. She pushed it under her bed, the floorboards creaking as she covered her tracks. At Hassoun's cabin, she spilled everything. The payments, the Washington company, the name Jameson Cole. Hassoun's eyes narrowed, his voice gravelly. "Cole's no small fish. He's got power, maybe in the government. Tread lightly." Makya's chest tightened, but she nodded, her mind already racing to the next step. "I'll find a reporter," she said, her voice firm. "Someone who'll listen." Back home, she scribbled a letter to a city newspaper, her words sharp with urgency. But as night fell, a crash shattered the silence. Frank's boots stomped through their house, his lantern swinging as he tore through shelves, searching. Makya grabbed Enapay, pulling him into the forest, the ledger's box still safe. They crouched among the pines, her heart hammering as Frank's curses echoed. Dawn revealed a note nailed to their door. "You can't hide." Makya's hand shook as she tore it down, fear flooding her. Frank was closing in, and Cole's shadow loomed larger. She thought of Wapun, her sister's frail body fighting infection, and Enapay's worried eyes. The note crumpled in her fist, her fear hardening into defiance. She'd send the letter, expose Cole, and protect her family. The danger was real, but so was her resolve. She headed to the post office, her steps quick, her heart unyielding. Makya's hands shook as she met Aiyana behind a weathered barn, the ledger's pages spread between them. The morning air was crisp, but sweat beaded on her brow. "We need a reporter to see this," she said, her voice low. Aiyana nodded, her eyes bright with resolve. "I know a man in the city, writes for the Tribune. He'll listen." They hunched over the documents, Makya's pencil scratching as she copied the payments and names, each stroke a step toward justice. Her thoughts drifted to Wapun, her sister's fever worsening, her leg a swollen ruin. "Wapun needs surgery," Makya whispered, her voice breaking. Aiyana squeezed her hand. Back home, Enapay sat by Wapun's bedside, his face etched with worry. "I'll watch her," he said, his voice steady. "You do what you must." Makya hugged him, gratitude mixing with fear, then slipped to the post office, the copied ledger tucked inside her shirt. She handed the package to the clerk, her heart lifting as it disappeared into the mailbag. The truth would reach the world now. But unknown to her, Frank lurked nearby, his eyes sharp. He cornered the clerk later, snatching the package with a grunt. Makya walked home, unaware, a fragile hope blooming in her chest. The Tribune would expose Grayson, Cole, the whole rotten system. She pictured Wapun smiling again, free from pain. The fight felt closer to victory, even as Frank's shadow loomed, his hands already tearing open her carefully written truth. Wapun's fever burned hotter, her whimpers slicing through Makya as she carried her sister to the hospital. The sterile halls echoed with her hurried steps, Wapun's weight heavy in her arms. At the counter, a doctor with cold eyes examined Wapun's leg, the bandages stained with pus. "Infections spread," he said, his tone flat. "Surgery's the only chance, but it's costly." Makya's heart sank, her voice desperate. How much? The number he gave was impossible, more than their family could scrape together in years. She pleaded, tears falling, but he turned away. Back at the reservation, Makya knocked on neighbors' doors, her voice raw as she begged for help. "Anything for my sister," she said, holding out a tin can. A few dropped coins, their faces kind but wary, whispering about Frank's threats. Others shut their doors, fear outweighing pity. The can grew heavier, but nowhere near enough. Makya returned to Wapun, who lay unconscious, her breaths shallow. She knelt beside the bed, clutching Wapun's hand, her sobs muffled against the blanket. "Don't leave me," she whispered, terror gripping her. The coins clinked in the can, mocking her efforts. Enapay's hand rested on her shoulder, silent but steady. Makya's despair threatened to swallow her, but Wapun's faint pulse under her fingers sparked a fire. She wiped her tears, her jaw tight. She'd find a way, sell her clothes, her labor, anything. Wapun wouldn't die. She stood, resolve burning through the darkness, ready to fight on. Aiyana's knock was urgent, her face pale as she slipped into Makya's house, a crumpled paper clutched in her hand. "I got this from the school," she said, unfolding a list of names, children labeled, transferred, but never seen again. Makya's breath caught, her eyes snagging on a familiar name, Lila, a quiet girl who'd sat beside her years ago. "They're stealing them," she whispered, horror choking her. Aiyana's voice was fierce. "We send this to another reporter, one Frank can't touch." Makya nodded, her hands trembling as she reached for her pencil. But heavy boots crunched outside, and Frank's shadow darkened the doorway. "What's that?" he snarled, lunging at Aiyana. The paper fluttered as he grabbed her arm, his fist slamming into her temple. Aiyana crumpled, blood trickling from her head, the list torn from her grip. Makya screamed, diving for her friend, but Frank shoved her back, snatching the paper and storming out. Makya's hand shook as she lifted Aiyana, her friend's pulse weak under her fingers. She half-carried, half-dragged Aiyana to the hospital, shouting for help. Nurses rushed over, their voices sharp as they worked. Makya sank to the floor, her shirt stained with Aiyana's blood, guilt crushing her. "I pulled you into this," she whispered, tears falling. The list was gone, her friend hurt, yet the names, Lila's among them, seared her mind. She clenched her fists, guilt fueling her resolve. She'd save Aiyana, Wapun, and expose the school's horrors, no matter the cost. Makya slumped in a hard hospital chair, her eyes fixed on Aiyana's still form, the bandage around her friend's head stark white against her dark hair. The antiseptic smell stung her nose, but guilt stung worse. "This is my fault," she whispered, her hands twisting in her lap, replaying Frank's fist, Aiyana's fall. A nurse's grim words echoed, warning Aiyana might not wake. Makya's chest ached, tears slipping down her cheeks. Enapay's heavy steps approached, his hand warm on her shoulder. "You're fighting for Wapun, for all of them," he said, his voice steady. "Don't stop now." His words pierced her fog of despair, but the weight lingered. As she adjusted Aiyana's blanket, A crumpled note slipped from her friend's pocket, scrawled with directions to a hidden shed. Makya's heart quickened. She slipped out, finding the shed behind the school, and unearthed a tin box. Inside, a detailed list of missing children, dates, and destinations chilled her. The truth was bigger, uglier than she'd imagined. Back at the hospital, a doctor's shout confirmed Grayson's spies had seen her at the shed. "He knows you're digging," the nurse hissed. Makya's stomach dropped, fear mingling with fury. She'd endangered Aiyana, maybe Wapun too, but the list in her hands was a weapon. She tucked it into her shirt, her resolve hardening. Despair clawed at her, but Wapun's pain, Aiyana's sacrifice, drove her forward. She'd find another way, no matter how hopeless it seemed. Aiyana's eyes fluttered open, weak but alive, and Makya's breath caught, relief flooding her as she gripped her friend's hand. The hospital room's dim light softened Aiyana's bruised face, but Makya's guilt lingered. She trudged to Asun's cabin, the stolen list heavy in her pocket, and poured out her failures. The lost documents, Frank's attack, her shattered hopes of exposing Grayson. Asun's weathered face softened, his voice calm. "Alone, you're a spark. With the community, you're a fire." Makya hesitated, picturing the reservation's fearful faces, their reluctance to defy the school. "They won't stand with me," she said, her voice low. Asun's eyes held hers. "Show them why they must." Back home, Makya sat by Wapun's bed, her sister's shallow breaths a quiet rhythm. Wapun's small hand curled in hers, and Makya's heart steadied, her purpose clear. She couldn't rely on papers alone. She needed her people. But as she stepped outside, a stranger's voice hissed from the shadows sent by Grayson. "Quit, or your sister's next." Makya's blood ran cold, her hand clutching the doorframe. The threat shook her, but Wapun's frail form, Aiyana's courage, burned brighter. The plan to gather evidence had crumbled, but Asun's words echoed. She'd rally the community, build a strength Grayson couldn't break. Her fear hardened into defiance as she planned her next move, ready to face the danger head-on. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. Makya stood before Asun in his cluttered cabin, her voice firm despite the knot in her chest. "We need a meeting. All the Blackfeet families." Asun nodded, his eyes gleaming, and sent word through the reservation. At the community hall, faces filled the wooden benches, some curious, others wary. Makya's hands trembled as she stepped forward, her voice steady but thick with emotion. "My sister Wapun was beaten, her leg broken, for speaking our language," she said, her words raw. A mother in the crowd stood, her voice shaking, recounting her son's scars from the school's punishments. Murmurs rippled, anger stirring. But fear lingered, voices whispering about Grayson's power, his threats. Makya raised her chin, her eyes fierce. "Together we can stop them. I'll protect us." Her promise hung heavy, some nodding, others turning away. Then boots stomped outside, and Frank burst in, his revolver glinting. He fired a shot into the ceiling, plaster dust raining down. "Go home," he bellowed, his glare fixed on Makya. The crowd scattered, chairs scraping, voices crying out. Makya stood frozen, her fists clenched, as Frank's sneer burned into her. The hall emptied, leaving her alone with the echo of the gunshot. Her heart sank, the meeting shattered, her hope of unity crumbling. She'd failed to rally them, and Frank's threat loomed larger. But as she stepped into the night, Wapun's face flashed in her mind, urging her on. She'd try again, somehow, no matter the cost. Makya trudged home through the reservation's quiet paths, the sting of the failed meeting heavy in her chest. The community hall's scattered chairs haunted her, Frank's gunshot still ringing in her ears. She sank onto the floor beside Wapun's bed, her shoulders slumped. Enapay knelt beside her, his voice soft but firm. "Our ancestors fought with nothing but their hearts. You carry that strength, Makya." His words warmed her, but doubt lingered. She rose at dawn, knocking on neighbors' doors, her voice raw as she pleaded for support. At one house, a father shook his head, his eyes downcast. "I work at the school. If I join you, we starve." Makya's heart sank, but she nodded, moving on. That evening, she gathered a small group for a prayer circle under the stars, their voices low as they sang Blackfeet chants. Wapun stirred, her fevered eyes opening, and sang a trembling note, her voice fragile but clear. Makya's tears fell, her sister's courage a spark in the dark. As the group dispersed, a young man, Tawa, lingered, his voice hesitant. "I saw papers in Grayson's office once, lists of kids, marked, gone." Makya's pulse quickened, hope flickering. The community's fear had fractured them, but Tawa's words were a lifeline. She clasped his arm, her voice steady. "Tell me everything." The fight wasn't lost. She'd rally them again, piece by piece, for Wapun, for all the stolen children. Makya met Tawa behind the community hall, the morning sun casting long shadows. His hands fidgeted as he spoke, describing a ledger in Grayson's office, names of children paired with dates and strange codes. "I thought it was just records," he said, "but it felt wrong." Makya's mind raced, the notebook's names echoing in her head. She gripped his shoulder. "Join us, Tawa. We need you." He nodded, fear in his eyes, but resolve too. She found Hassoun, urging him to call another meeting. That evening, the hall filled with more faces, their murmurs cautious but curious. Makya stood tall, her voice ringing as she held up her copied list of missing children. "This is what they're hiding. We stopped them together." Hands raised in support, though some stayed silent, fear holding them back. Tawa spoke up, his story bolstering hers, and a ripple of agreement spread. But as the meeting ended, a boy slipped Makya a note, Grayson's scrawl chilling her. "Stop, or the reservation pays." Her breath caught, the threat a cold blade against her hope. She tucked the note away, her jaw tight. Grayson's reach was long, but she wouldn't cower. The community was stirring, their voices growing. She met Hassoun's steady gaze, her resolve hardening. They'd planned something bigger, a march, a stand. The note burned in her pocket, but Wapun's pain, Nita's absence fueled her. She'd lead them forward, no matter the risk. Makya's voice carried over the reservation's dusty paths as she rallied a small crowd, her hands gesturing with urgency. "We march today for Wapun, for all our kids." Hassoun led the way, his weathered hands gripping a banner scrawled with "Justice for Blackfeet." The group, 30 strong, moved through the reservation, Makya's heart swelling as she spoke of Wapun's broken leg, Nita's disappearance. Her words shook with passion, eyes meeting each marcher's. A handful of boarding school students slipped into the crowd, their faces bruised but defiant, risking punishment to join. The air buzzed with their chants, but sirens wailed, and Frank's police truck roared up, blocking their path. "Disperse now," he shouted, his hand on his gun. Makya stepped forward, her voice unwavering. "We won't be silenced." She urged the crowd to stand firm, their feet planted. But a woman's nervous glance caught Makya's eye, and whispers spread. The woman, a school cook, had tipped off Grayson, fear for her job outweighing loyalty. Frank's officers shoved forward, scattering the marchers. Makya's shouts were drowned by cries, the banner trampled under boots. Hassan pulled her back as the crowd fled, her chest heaving with frustration. The march had crumbled, betrayed from within. She kicked the dirt, her hope fraying, but Wapun's face flashed in her mind. Her sister's pain a relentless call. She'd regroup, find another way. The fight wasn't over, even if it broke her heart. Makya's heart sank as whispers reached her, pointing to Lena, the cook who'd betrayed the march to Grayson. The reservation's quiet paths felt heavier as she marched to Lena's small house, her chest tight with hurt. She knocked, and Lena's eyes widened, guilt etched in her lined face. "Why?" Makya asked, her voice shaking. Lena's hands twisted her apron, her voice low. "My boy works at the school. They'd fire him, maybe worse." Tears welled in her eyes, and Makya's anger softened, seeing a mother's fear. "Don't do it again," she said, her tone firm but forgiving. She turned away, resolve steadying her. Hassoun called a secret meeting that night. A handful of trusted families gathered in his cabin. Makya stood, her voice raw. "We're stronger together. Trust me. Trust each other." Nods met her words, cautious but real. But a runner burst in, breathless, with Grayson's latest threat. He'd shut the boarding school, cutting jobs and aid. Gasps filled the room, eyes darting in panic. Makya's fists clenched, the community's fragile unity fraying. Lena's betrayal, Grayson's threat, weighed like stones, but she met Hassoun's steady gaze. "We'll fight this," she said, her voice fierce. The room quieted, some nodding, others hesitant. The division cut deep, but Wapun's pain, the missing children, burned in her mind. She'd mend the cracks, rally them again, no matter how many doors she had to knock on. Under a starry sky, Makya stood at the reservation's center, a bonfire crackling as families gathered for a Blackfeet ceremony. Her hands shook, but she spoke, her voice clear. "We honor our roots to fight for our future." Wapun, propped on a blanket, her leg bandaged, sang a Blackfeet song, her voice frail but piercing, stirring hearts. Makya's eyes stung, her sister's courage a beacon. Hassoun stepped forward, his voice rich, recounting tales of ancestors who defied odds with unity. "We are their blood," he said, and hands clasped in agreement. Makya shared her dream, a school where Blackfeet children could learn their language, free from fear. "I need you," she said, and several parents pledged support, their voices firm. She planned a larger march, hope rising. As the fire died, a student, Kame, tugged her sleeve, his whisper urgent. "Grayson's hiding new papers, locked away." Makya's pulse quickened, the chance to strengthen their fight electrifying. She thanked Keme, her mind racing. The ceremony had rekindled their spirit, but Keme's news was a spark for action. She gathered a few trusted youths, their eyes bright with purpose. The school's secrets were within reach, and she'd seize them. Wapun's song echoed in her heart, pushing her forward. She'd lead the march, armed with new evidence, no matter the danger lurking in Grayson's shadow. Makya led Tawa and Kame through the boarding school's back gate, the midnight air sharp against their skin. The building loomed, its windows dark. They slipped into Grayson's office, Makya's hairpin snapping the lock. Her hand searched, finding a small safe under the desk. Tawa's knife pried it open, revealing a folder thick with papers. Makya's breath caught, the documents listing payments to Jameson Cole alongside names of children marked "delivered." Her stomach churned, the truth of trafficking glaring. Keem whispered, "This is it," as he stuffed copies into his shirt. A guard's lantern flickered outside, his boots thudding closer. Makya shoved the folder back, pulling the boys behind a cabinet. The guard peered in, his light grazing their hiding spot, then left. They bolted, hearts pounding, through the gate. At Hassoun's cabin, Makya spread the papers, her voice trembling as she read aloud the damning details. Hassoun's face darkened, his nod grim. This could end them, but a shout outside broke the moment. Frank's voice barking orders. "Find her!" he roared, his men scouring the reservation. Makya's blood ran cold, realizing their break-in was exposed. She hid the folder in Hassoun's stove, her hands steady despite fear. Frank's hunt was closing in, but the papers were her weapon. She'd use them to rally the community, expose Cole's empire. Wapun's face, Nita's name, fueled her. She slipped into the night, ready for the next fight, undaunted. Makya stood in the community hall, her voice echoing as she held up the stolen documents, the names of missing children stark against the paper. Faces in the crowd widened with shock, murmurs rising. "We march to the school tomorrow," she declared, her heart pounding. "We demand justice." Hassoun nodded, assigning tasks, sending men to craft banners, women to spread word. Alone later, Makya paced her small room, rehearsing her speech, her words a plea for courage. But whispers reached her, voices trembling about Grayson's wrath, his power to crush them. She met their eyes at the hall's door, her voice firm. "I'll stand between you and them, I swear." Nods followed, hesitant but growing. As she left, Tawa pulled her aside, his face pale. "Grayson's hired men, rough ones, to stop us." Makya's stomach twisted, the threat of violence real. She thanked Tawa, her mind racing. The documents were their strength, but Grayson's hired thugs were a new danger. She gathered the youth, their faces set, and planned defenses, sticks and stones against hired fists. Wapun's fevered face flashed in her mind, urging her on. She'd lead the march, speak the truth, and protect her people, no matter the cost. The community's hope rested on her, and she wouldn't falter. As dawn neared, she clutched her speech, resolve burning through fear, ready to face Grayson's wrath with evidence in hand. The morning sun blazed as Makya led the marchers through the reservation, their chants ringing. Hassoun walked beside her, his banner high, demanding justice for Blackfeet children. They reached the boarding school, its gray walls looming, and Makya climbed onto a crate, her voice soaring. "These papers prove they've stolen our kids!" she shouted, holding up the documents, the crowd gasping at the names of the lost. Hassoun's deep voice followed, naming victims, his words heavy with grief. But shouts erupted from the school's gates, and a dozen rough men charged, clubs swinging, Grayson's hired thugs. Makya leapt down, shoving a woman out of harm's way, her voice hoarse as she yelled, "Stand together!" Fists flew, screams rose, and the crowd scattered, banners torn. Makya swung a stick, fending off a thug, but a blow grazed her shoulder, pain flaring. Tawa pulled her back as the marchers fled, some limping, bloodied. Alone by the school, Makya's breath hitched, defeat crushing her. A messenger arrived, Grayson's voice cold through his words. "The school closes tomorrow, your fault." The community's panic would follow. Jobs lost, lives upended. Makya's knees buckled, her failure a weight she couldn't bear. Wapun's pain, the scattered marchers burned in her mind. She'd rallied them, only to watch them break. Despair clawed at her, but a spark of defiance lingered. She'd find another way somehow. Makya stumbled home, her shoulder throbbing, the march's chaos replaying in her mind. She sank beside Wapun's bed, her voice a whisper. "I failed them, Wapun." Her sister's shallow breaths answered, a reminder of why she fought. Enapay sat across, his eyes steady. "Our people endured worse, Makya. You keep going, like they did." His words stirred her, a faint light in the dark. Hassoun's knock came at dawn, his voice urgent. "The documents, Makya. Take them to court. The world needs to see." She nodded, the idea a lifeline. She gathered the papers, her hand steady as she drafted a speech, each word a weapon against Grayson. Wapun stirred, her frail fingers offering a drawing, a Blackfeet girl standing tall. Makya's eyes stung, her sister's gift rekindling her fire. "For you," she whispered, tucking the drawing close. But a neighbor's warning shattered the moment. Grayson had hired a sharp city lawyer, one who'd bury her in court. Makya's heart raced, fear gripping her. The community's hope, her evidence, rested on a trial she might lose. She clutched Wapun's drawing, Enapay's words echoing. The march had failed, the community fractured, but the courtroom offered a new battleground. She'd face Jameson Cole, their lawyer, with the truth. Her despair hardened into resolve as she memorized her speech, ready to fight where words, not fists, would decide the outcome. The struggle wasn't over, it was evolving. Makya hunched over a scrap of paper, her pencil scratching out a speech for the courthouse, each word a plea for Wapun's justice. The dim lamplight flickered, casting shadows as Enapay sat nearby, his voice gentle but tense. "Practice loud, Makya, they need to hear you," she stood, her voice shaking as she read, Enapay nodding despite the worry in his eyes. At dawn, Hassoun gathered the community in a prayer circle, their chants rising for Makya and Wapun's strength. Parents clasped her hands, their whispers of support a lifeline. "We're with you," one said, and Makya's heart lifted. She hid the documents in a tin under the floorboards, her fingers lingering, knowing their power. Aiyana, her head still bandaged, limped to her side, her voice firm. "I'll testify, Makya. We'll win." Makya hugged her, gratitude overwhelming. But as she returned home, Frank's shadow loomed at the door, his growl chilling. "Go to court, and Wapun suffers." Makya's blood ran cold, her hand gripping the frame, but Wapun's frail form in bed flashed before her. She stared Frank down, her voice steady. "You won't stop me." He smirked and left, but fear gnawed at her. The trial was her chance, Grayson's reckoning, and she'd face him, documents in hand for every child stolen. Danger loomed, but her vow to Wapun burned brighter. She memorized her speech, resolve steeling her for the fight ahead, no matter Frank's threats. The courthouse buzzed as Makya stepped inside, her arms clutching the documents, their weight grounding her. The room fell silent as she took the stand, her voice clear despite her racing heart. "The boarding school beats our children, steals them," she said, recounting Wapun's broken leg, Nita's disappearance. Gasps rippled through the crowd, eyes wide with horror. Grayson stood, his face red, his voice sharp. "She's lying, a troublemaker seeking revenge." Helen followed, her tone icy, labeling Makya a disruptive liar. Makya's hands shook, but she held up the ledger, reading aloud the payments to Cole, the names of missing children. The crowd murmured, stunned, and the judge leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "These are serious claims," he said. "Where's your proof?" Makya pointed to the papers, her voice rising. "It's here." But a man rose from the back, his suit crisp, his voice smooth. "I'm Jameson Cole," he said, and Makya's stomach dropped. His presence chilled her, his name a specter from the ledger. He smiled, addressing the judge. "Those documents are fabricated, her accusations baseless." The crowd's murmurs turned skeptical, eyes narrowing at Makya. Her heart sank, the room spinning as Cole's words twisted her truth. She'd laid bare the school's crimes, but Cole's shadow loomed, threatening to bury her. Wapun's face anchored her, but doubt crept in. Could she fight a man like him, or was justice slipping away? Cole's voice dripped with confidence as he faced the judge, his polished shoes gleaming. "These papers are forgeries, crafted to smear the school." Makya's throat tightened, her voice rising in protest. "They're real. I found them in Grayson's office." But the judge's eyes hardened, his gavel tapping. "Enough, miss. You need more than this." She clutched the stand, desperation clawing her, but Cole's calm smile mocked her efforts. Enapay leapt from his seat, his voice booming. "My daughter speaks the truth." The bailiff grabbed him, dragging him out as he shouted, "Makya, don't give up." Her heart twisted, his faith a fleeting warmth. The courtroom's walls seemed to close in, Cole's lies suffocating her hope. As she stepped down, a folded note slipped into her hand. Aiyana's scrawl inside. Cole runs it all. The trafficking, everything. Makya's breath caught. The truth sharper now, but heavier. Cole wasn't just a name. He was the monster behind the missing children. Her mind raced, grasping for a way to expose him, but the judge's voice cut through. "Arrest her for slander." Guards seized her arms, their grips bruising as they led her to a cell. The clang of the door echoed, her hope crumbling. Enapay's cries, Wapun's pain. Aiyana's note burned in her mind, but the cell's cold walls mocked her. She'd faced Grayson, only to fall into Cole's trap. Despair gripped her, but Aiyana's words lingered, a faint spark. She'd find a way out, to unmask Cole, or die trying. The cell's damp walls glistened in the flicker of a single lantern, casting long shadows that seemed to mock Makya's solitude. She curled against the stone floor, the chill seeping into her bones, her wrists raw from the cuffs. Cole's smug voice echoed in her mind, his lies burying her truth. Enapay's shout, "Don't give up!" surfaced, a lifeline in the dark. She closed her eyes, picturing Wapun's frail smile, and resolve sparked. A soft scrape broke the silence, a young guard slipping a note through the bars. Aiyana's handwriting promised escape. "Midnight. Cough hard." Makya's pulse quickened, hope stirring. When the clock chimed, she clutched her chest, coughing until her voice rasped. The guard, his eyes kind, unlocked the door, whispering, "Run." Makya sprinted through the station's shadows, her boots pounding toward the reservation. Shouts erupted, Frank's voice roaring, "She's out!" His lantern swung behind her, gaining ground. Makya's lungs burned, but Tawa and Keme appeared, guiding her through tangled paths. Community hands waved her into hiding, their silent aid a shield. She collapsed in a ditch, breath heaving, Frank's curses fading. The reservation had saved her, their trust a quiet strength. Wapun's pain, Aiyana's risk, fueled her. Frank's hunt was relentless, but she'd outrun him, expose Cole and fight on. Her heart steadied, ready for the next step, unbroken by the cell's cold grip. Candlelight flickered in Hassoun's cramped cabin, casting shadows over the stolen documents spread on the table. Aiyana, her face still bruised, slid a new paper forward, her voice low. More of Cole's deals, names, dates, cities. Makya's eyes traced the transactions, her resolve hardening. "We send this to the national press," she said, her voice firm. She penned a letter, each word a blade against Cole's empire, and handed it to Tawa, who knew a courier beyond Frank's reach. The courier's nod was cautious. "The Chicago Tribune will dig, but it'll take time." Makya's thoughts turned to Wapun, her sister's fever spiking, a second surgery looming. Fear gnawed, but she squeezed Aiyana's hand. "We'll save her." Shouts broke the night, Grayson's voice blaring through a megaphone. "Makya's a fugitive. Surrender her." Hassoun bolted the door, his face grim. Makya's heart raced. The documents her only leverage. She memorized the reporter's name, her plan hinging on his work. Wapun's weakening breaths haunted her, demanding haste. The community's murmured support reached her, but Grayson's men circled closer. She folded the letter's copy, her hands steady despite the threat. Time was slipping, but the truth was her weapon. She'd beat Grayson's hunt, get the story out, and protect her sister. The stakes were brutal, but her will was fiercer, her next move already forming. Frank's voice thundered through the reservation, his men's boots stomping as they tore through homes, searching for Makya. In Hassoun's attic, she and Enapay crouched, dust tickling their noses, the air thick with tension. Below, Hassoun stood at his door, his voice calm, but unyielding. "No one's here, Larson." Frank's snarl cut through. "Give her up, or this house is ash." Makya's heart hammered, picturing flames devouring Hassoun's home, the community's trust burning with it. She couldn't let him suffer for her. "I have to go," she whispered to Enapay, his eyes wide with dread. She descended, her voice steady as she faced Frank. "It's me you want. Leave him." Frank's grin was cold, cuffs snapping around her wrists. At the station, Grayson's shadow loomed, his voice a hiss. "Drop your lies, or Wapun pays." Makya's stomach churned, her sister's fragile form vivid in her mind, but the documents, hidden in the forest, were her strength. She met Grayson's gaze, her voice ice. "Never." His eyes narrowed, rage flickering, but she stood tall, Wapun's pain, the stolen children, anchoring her. The cell door clanged shut, but her resolve roared. She'd shielded Hassoun, her family, by facing Grayson directly. The reporter would get her letter, and Cole's crimes would unravel. Danger pressed close, but she was unbroken, her mind racing for the next chance to strike. The cell's darkness swallowed Makya, the air thick with damp and despair. Grayson's ultimatum, "Retract or Wapun suffers," rang in her ears, but she'd spat her refusal, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing her bones. Now, chained to a rusted pipe, she scratched a note on a scrap of bandage, her fingers trembling. "Aiyana, help." A kind-eyed guard, slipping her bread, took the note with a nod. Hours later, muffled shouts echoed outside, Aiyana's voice directing Tawa and Keme. They distracted the night guard, a bottle crashing to draw his attention, and Keem's swift hands picked the cell lock. Makya stumbled free, her legs weak, and bolted into the forest, branches clawing her skin. Frank's bellows followed, his lantern bobbing through the trees, his men close. Makya's breath burned, but Blackfeet youths emerged, throwing stones to slow Frank's pursuit. She dove behind a fallen log, heart pounding, as Frank's curses faded. Tucked in her pocket, she found a folded letter from Enapay, slipped there by Kime. "Keep fighting, my daughter." Her eyes stung, his faith a spark in the dark. Safe in the reservation's embrace, she clutched the letter, Wapun's pain and Cole's crimes fueling her. Frank's hunt had failed, but the war wasn't won. She'd find a new way, her resolve unbroken, ready to strike back with the community's strength behind her. Hassoun's cabin glowed with candlelight, the air heavy as Makya recounted the trial's collapse, Cole's lies, her arrest. Her voice broke, guilt weighing her words. Hassoun's eyes were steady. "The press, Makya. They'll listen where courts won't." She nodded, the idea a lifeline. She handed the documents to Enapay, her voice firm. "Take these to the papers, father." He clasped her hand, his nod resolute. At home, Makya sat by Wapun, her sister's breaths shallow, her fevered skin hot under Makya's touch. "Hold on," she whispered, pain slicing her heart. Enapay's voice cut through. "I'll get the truth out. For her." Makya hugged him, fear for his safety mingling with hope. She steeled herself, knowing Cole's reach was vast. A runner burst in, breathless, with news. Cole knew she'd escaped, his men scouring for her, vowing revenge. Makya's pulse raced, the documents her only weapon now. The trial had failed. Cole's trap had snapped shut, but Enapay's mission offered a new path. She kissed Wapun's forehead, her sister's frail form a silent plea. The fight was riskier, Cole's wrath closer, but the press could break him. Makya stood, her resolve a quiet fire, ready for the dangers ahead. The courtroom was lost, but the world would hear her truth, no matter what Cole unleashed. Dust swirled on the road as Enapay slipped out at dawn, the documents hidden in his coat, his steps quick toward a distant post office beyond the reservation. He moved like a shadow, avoiding Frank's patrols, and mailed the papers to a New York editor, his letter scrawled with accusations against Cole. Back home, He pulled Makya aside, his voice low. "It's done. The world will know." Her heart leapt, but fear gripped her, picturing Frank's gun aimed at her father. "You're in danger now," she said, her voice trembling. Enapay's hand rested on her shoulder, steady. "For you, Wapun, it's worth it." Makya joined Hassoun in a quiet prayer, their voices soft, seeking protection for Enapay. In a far-off newsroom, a reporter opened the package, his eyes narrowing at the ledger's names, the trafficking scale, and began digging. But on the reservation, a neighbor's whisper reached Makya. Frank had seen Enapay leave, his men trailing him. Her stomach dropped, dread coiling tight. She hadn't known, hadn't protected him. The reporter's work offered hope, but Enapay's risk loomed larger. She clutched Hassoun's arm, her voice fierce. "We keep fighting for him." Wapun's pain, the missing children, burned in her chest. Unaware of Frank's shadow closing in, she held on to the fragile promise of the press, her resolve unyielding, ready to carry her father's sacrifice forward. Twilight cast long shadows over the dusty road as Enapay hurried back from the post office, the weight of the mailed documents easing his heart. A sudden rustle stopped him, Frank stepping from the trees, his revolver glinting. "Hand over the papers, old man," Frank growled, his eyes cold. Enapay's jaw tightened, his voice steady. "You'll get nothing." He turned to run, his boots kicking up dirt, desperate to shield Makya. A shot cracked, and pain seared his chest. He stumbled, collapsing in the dust, blood pooling beneath him. With fading strength, he tucked a copied ledger page into his coat, hiding it from Frank's grasp. Hours later, Tawa's voice broke as he delivered the news to Makya at Hassoun's cabin. "Your father, he's gone." Makya's world shattered, her knees buckling as sobs tore from her throat. She clutched Tawa's arm, grief drowning her. Searching Enapay's coat, brought by a neighbor, she found his blood-stained letter. "Fight on, for Wapun, for our people." Her tears fell on the words. Enapay's sacrifice, a searing call. The ledger page, crumpled but intact, lay beside it. Pain crushed her, but his courage lit a fire in her chest. She gripped the letter, Wapun's frail face and the missing children anchoring her. Enapay's death was a wound, but his strength lived in her. She'd honor him, expose Cole, and finish what he started, no matter the cost. Candlelight flickered in Makya's small room as she unfolded Enapay's letter, his words a lifeline through her grief. "Fight on," he'd written, and she would. She found the hidden ledger page, its names and payments, a testament to his sacrifice, and sent it to the Chicago reporter through Tawa's courier. Days later, the newspaper hit the stands, its headline screaming, "Trafficking ring exposed at Montana school." The nation reeled, letters flooding the editor, demanding justice. Makya read the article, her heart pounding, as Cole's name glared in print. A telegram arrived from a New York aid group, pledging support, their words a spark of hope. She organized a memorial for Enapay, the reservation gathering under a gray sky, their voices singing Blackfeet chants. Makya spoke, her voice raw, honoring her father's bravery. But Cole's response came swift, his statement in the papers calling the article slanderous lies. Protests erupted outside his offices, public outrage mounting, yet his defiance chilled her. Hassan's hand steadied her shoulder. "He's cornered, but dangerous." Makya nodded, Wapun's fevered face urging her forward. The article had shaken the world, but Cole's reach loomed. She hid the telegrams, her hope fragile, but growing. Enapay's death had ignited a fire, and the nation's eyes were on her. Fear of Cole's retaliation gnawed, but she stood taller, ready to push harder, to ensure her father's sacrifice wasn't in vain. Tension hung over the reservation like a storm cloud, Cole's hired men prowling its edges, Their threats whispered to families at dusk. "Stay quiet, or lose everything," one hissed to a neighbor. Makya rallied Tawa and Keme, forming a night patrol, their sticks ready to guard the community. At the hospital, Wapun's third surgery loomed, her sister's breaths faint, her leg a battleground of infection. Makya held her hand, her heart twisting as Wapun's eyes fluttered, too weak to speak. "You'll make it," she whispered, tears falling. Hassoun found her there, his voice firm. "Your father's fight lives in you. Keep going." She nodded, Enapay's letter a weight in her pocket. The reporter's latest article landed, exposing more of Cole's deals, public fury swelling. But a runner brought grim news. Cole had hired a ruthless lawyer, suing Makya and the paper for defamation. The legal threat loomed, a noose tightening around her. Makya's hands clenched, fear battling resolve. Wapun's weakening pulse, the community's frightened eyes, demanded she fight on. The reporter's evidence was her shield, but Cole's power was vast. She met Tawa's gaze, her voice steady. "We protect our own and push harder." The lawsuit could crush her, but Enapay's sacrifice, Wapun's life, burned brighter. She'd face Cole's legal assault, rally the community, and expose his crimes, no matter the odds stacking against her. The community hall buzzed with tense voices as Makya stood before the crowd, her hands steady as she held up the reporter's latest article. "Cole's crimes are exposed, but he's fighting back. We must stand together," she urged, her voice ringing. Hassoun stepped forward, his words heavy, recounting Enapay's sacrifice, how he died to send the truth to the world. Eyes glistened, and hands clasped in solidarity. Tawa and Kame volunteered, their faces set, ready to guard the reservation against Cole's men. Makya outlined a protest at Cole's company headquarters, her heart pounding with purpose. Wapun, wheeled in by a neighbor, offered a drawing of Blackfeet warriors, its bold lines igniting the crowd's spirit. Makya's throat tightened, her sister's strength a beacon. But shouts erupted outside, Cole's hired thugs smashing windows, their clubs raised. Makya grabbed a broom, rallying Tawa and others to push back. The community surged, driving the thugs off with shouts and thrown stones. Breathless, Makya met Hassoun's nod, her resolve ironclad. The attack had shaken them, but they'd held firm. Wapun's drawing lay safe, a symbol of their fight. The protest would go on, bigger, louder, with the community's heart behind it. Cole's threats loomed, but Makya stood taller, ready to lead her people to his doorstep, their unity her greatest weapon. A crisp dawn lit the reservation as Makya assigned roles for the protest, her voice calm but fierce. Hassoun hammered signs, their slogans demanding justice, while others tested a megaphone, its crackle echoing. Aiyana, her strength returning, sent telegrams to reporters, ensuring the press would witness their stand. Makya rehearsed her speech in a quiet corner, each word a blade against Cole's lies. A lawyer's letter arrived, Cole's attempt to block the protest with legal threats, but Makya tore it up, her jaw tight. At the hospital, she knelt by Wapun, their whispered prayers blending with the beep of monitors, her sister's hand warm in hers. A telegram interrupted, a rescued victim's voice on the line, a girl named Lila, begging to help. "I was sold," Lila said, her words chilling Makya. The call fueled her, Lila's survival a fire in her chest. She hugged Wapun, strength flowing from their bond. The protest was their chance to end Cole, and Lila's story was new ammunition. Reporters would amplify their cry, and the community's resolve would carry them. Cole's legal maneuvers loomed, but Makya's purpose burned brighter. She memorized her speech, picturing Lila, Wapun, Enapay, her heart unyielding. The fight was now, and she'd lead with every ounce of courage, ready to face Cole's empire head-on. Lila's trembling voice echoed in Makya's mind as she transcribed her testimony, each word a nail in Cole's coffin. She sent it to the reporter, who published it, the nation reeling at the survivor's tale of trafficking. Makya gathered the community, her voice steady, preparing them for the final protest. At a quiet ceremony, they honored Enapay, his name carved on a wooden plaque, their chants a vow to finish his fight. The reservation stood united, faces fierce, ready to march. A hospital call brought joy. Wapun's surgery had succeeded, her fever breaking. Makya's tears fell, relief flooding her as she planned the protest with renewed fire. But Cole's threat arrived, a chilling note promising armed men to crush the march. Makya's heart raced, but she met Hassoun's gaze, her resolve unshaken. The articles, Lila's story, had cornered Cole, and their protest would seal his fate. She clutched Enapay's letter, Wapun's recovery a beacon. The community's strength, the press's spotlight, were her weapons. Cole's violence loomed, but the truth was winning. She stood taller, ready to lead, knowing this march could end it all, her father's sacrifice paving the way. The city's heart pulsed as Makya led the Blackfeet to Cole's towering headquarters, their banners high, voices roaring. Hassoun's speech opened, his words raw, tracing the pain of stolen children in Enapay's death. Makya climbed a makeshift stage, her voice booming through the megaphone, revealing the ledger's secrets, the trafficking ring's scale. The crowd, swelled by city folk, chanted for justice, their cries shaking the glass building. Cole emerged, his face pale, his voice shrill as he denied the charges. A reporter's sharp question, citing Lila's testimony, tripped him, his stammer betraying guilt. Makya stepped forward, her eyes locked on his. "You sold our children," she said, her voice cutting like steel, the crowd roaring behind her. Cole's face twisted, his denials faltering. He turned to flee, but the crowd surged, blocking his path, their hands raised in defiance. Makya's heart pounded, Enapay's letter in her pocket, Wapun's survival her strength. The protest had cornered Cole, his empire crumbling under public fury. She stood firm, the documents her sword, the community her shield. Cole's escape failed, his lies exposed. The fight was at its peak, and she'd pushed him to the edge. Victory was close, but not won, her resolve burning as she faced the man who'd taken so much. Federal agents stormed through the crowd, their badges flashing as they seized Cole, his wrists cuffed, his face ashen. Grayson and Frank followed, dragged from the building, their protests drowned by cheers. Makya's documents, now national headlines, detailed the trafficking ring's horrors, sparking outrage. The network collapsed, victims rescued from distant cities, their stories flooding the press. Makya returned to the reservation, greeted by embraces, voices chanting her name. At the hospital, Wapun sat up, her smile weak but bright, her recovery a miracle. Makya hugged her, tears falling, relief overwhelming. A quiet moment with Hassoun brought a shock. A rescued girl, his granddaughter, was among the survivors. Her return a tearful reunion. Makya's chest swelled, the fight's meaning clear. Enapay's sacrifice, Wapun's survival. The community's courage had broken Cole's empire. She stood by Hassoun, watching his granddaughter smile, the weight of their victory sinking in. The missing were coming home, the truth had won, but the cost lingered. Makya's heart carried Enapay's loss, yet it soared with purpose. The Blackfeet stood stronger, their voices louder, their future brighter. She'd fought for Wapun, for Nita, for all of them, and won. The struggle's scars remained, but so did her strength. Ready for whatever came next, the reservation's heart glowed under a setting sun as families gathered in a wide circle, their faces lit by flickering torches. Makya stood at the center, her hands steady as she unveiled a wooden plaque, Enapay's name carved deep, honoring his sacrifice. Wapun, leaning on a crutch, her legs stronger, stepped forward, her voice soft but clear, reading a poem of her father's courage, his love for their people. Tears streaked faces, Makya's among them, her chest tight with pride and loss. Hasun raised his hands, his prayer weaving through the crowd, blessing Enapay and the rescued victims, their spirits alive in the chant. Makya spoke, her voice rising. "We'll build a school, a place for our children to learn as Blackfeet, free from fear." The crowd roared, pledging hands and hearts to her dream. A telegram arrived mid-ceremony, a national foundation offering funds to build the school, their support a thunderclap of hope. Makya's eyes widened, her breath catching as she read it aloud. The community cheered, their unity a living flame. Enapay's loss ached, but his legacy fueled her vision. The foundation's promise was a beacon, a future where Wapun's children could thrive. Makya clasped Hasun's hand, hope swelling for the Blackfeet's tomorrow, her resolve to honor her father's sacrifice unwavering, ready to build a new path. A soft breeze carried the scent of paint and canvas as Wapun's artwork filled the community hall, her bold strokes capturing Blackfeet stories. Makya organized the exhibition, her voice warm as she welcomed neighbors, their eyes bright with pride. Wapun, now walking with a limp, smiled shyly as she explained her paintings, each one a tribute to their culture. Makya's heart swelled, her sister's talent a light after so much dark. The crowd grew, coins and bills piling in a donation box for the new school. A reporter, drawn by the story, scribbled notes, his article soon spreading Wapun's art nationwide. Donors responded, a flood of funds arriving, enough to break ground on the school. At the event's close, Hasun held up Wapun's painting of a Blackfeet warrior, declaring it the school's emblem. Makya's eyes stung, Wapun's gasp echoing her own. The crowd cheered, their voices a chorus of triumph. The funds, the emblem, were more than money or art. They were a legacy, Enapay's dream made real. Makya hugged Wapun, their shared loss and victory binding them. The school would rise, a testament to their fight, their culture. Cole's shadow was gone, but the work wasn't done. Makya stood beside her sister, ready to build, her heart full of purpose, knowing their design would endure. The new school stood proud on the reservation, its walls adorned with Blackfeet symbols, a haven for learning. Makya cut the ribbon, her hands steady, the crowd's cheers ringing. Wapun, now a teacher, led her first class, her voice strong as she taught Blackfeet words, her limp a badge of survival. At a quiet ceremony, Makya unveiled a memorial for Enapay and the trafficking victims, their names etched in stone, her voice breaking as she spoke of their courage. Aiyana, now a national advocate, stood beside her, her work lifting native voices across the country. The Blackfeet thrived, their community tighter, their spirit unbroken. Makya sat alone later, Enapay's letter in her hands, his words a balm. Fight on. Peace settled in her heart, his love eternal. A telegram arrived. Wapun's warrior painting chosen for a national museum, its image a symbol of resilience. Makya's eyes glistened, pride mixing with loss. The Blackfeet had won, their unity and Enapay's sacrifice shattering Cole's crimes. But the cost lingered, a quiet ache. Wapun's art, the school, their strength, spoke of hope, of battles worth fighting. Makya stood, the letter folded close, her heart steady. The fight had changed her, but it had saved her people. Their future shone, built on love, loss, and an unyielding will to endure, a testament to the power of standing together.